We've all heard it before, that masturbation is something completely normal, a natural part of life. But have you ever stopped to ask, to what extent is it truly harmless? How often can you do it before it crosses the line into something more dangerous, something addictive, and what if you simply can't stop? These are the hard questions most people avoid. But today, we're going to face them head on. In this video, you'll understand exactly why you should reconsider this so-called harmless habit, because behind its disguise of normalcy lies a subtle, powerful trap that's been draining the willpower of an entire generation. Before we dive in, I want to offer a quick note. Yes, the video's cover image was intense, maybe even exaggerated, but it had to be. Why? Because this is an issue of the 21st century that's silently weakening both young men and adults alike, numbing their ambition, stealing their energy, and quietly eroding their discipline. This video isn't just a warning, it's a deep dive into what's happening inside your brain, both scientifically and philosophically, and what ancient wisdom, especially from the lens of Stoicism, has to say about this modern vice. By the end, you'll see how much of your power is being given away without you even realizing it. If you care about reclaiming your strength, clarity, and discipline, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We're here to sharpen your mindset, not just entertain you. Now, let's begin. Modern medicine is quite clear on one point. Masturbation is considered a normal activity. Not only in humans, it's been observed in dogs, monkeys, and other mammals. From a biological perspective, it's not seen as strange or rare. But that view hasn't always existed. In the past, masturbation wasn't seen as a personal choice or casual behavior. It was treated as something immoral, especially for men. Why? Because back then, any sexual act that didn't lead to reproduction was viewed as wasteful and destructive. For women, the concern was different. It was believed that if a woman discovered pleasure alone, without needing a man, it would drive her away from relationships altogether. On top of that moral judgment came fear. The belief that masturbation caused physical harm. People were told it led to illness, weakness, and even mental instability. So, it wasn't just frowned upon, it was feared. But let's fast forward to the present. What do we know now, particularly for men who struggle with insomnia or anxiety? One thing that's widely known is this: masturbation induces sleep. That's why many men turn to it late at night, not out of desire, but out of habit or desperation for rest. The French Institute of Health and Medical Research conducted a fascinating study. They discovered that, after orgasm, the male brain literally shuts down sexual desire. The cerebral cortex, the area of the brain responsible for conscious thought, goes into rest mode. Once climax is reached, the brain enters a kind of shutdown. That's why, afterward, men often feel drowsy, unmotivated, and uninterested in anything. Even sex itself. At first glance, this may seem harmless, even helpful. But here's the hidden danger. What happens when this becomes your daily escape? What happens when it becomes the shortcut to sleep, stress relief, or boredom? So yes, it's true. Many men fall asleep easily after sexual activity. But here's the real question. What's the problem with that? If it helps you relax, if it reduces stress, if it calms the mind, then what could possibly be so dangerous? Well, hidden within that very benefit is a trap, a quiet, slippery slope that most don't recognize until it's too late. And if you've followed this channel for some time, you likely know exactly what I'm talking about. You see, masturbation triggers the release of dopamine, the feel-good hormone in your brain. Dopamine is powerful. It gives us pleasure, a sense of calm, stress relief, even a short-lived reward system. For a moment, it makes everything feel okay again. But that moment comes at a cost. Why? Because dopamine is addictive, not in a dramatic or obvious way at first, but in a subtle, creeping form. It's like dripping honey into your brain, sweet, slow, and sticky, so pleasurable that your mind begins to crave it more and more until you need it just to feel normal. In 2017, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders officially recognized something called hypersexuality disorder. a condition that includes compulsive masturbation under the larger umbrella of obsessive-compulsive disorders. That's right, it's not just a bad habit. It's now understood as a real, diagnosable disorder, one that can lead to severe consequences in both mental health and family life. And here's the scary part. It doesn't always start with intent. In many cases, you won't even realize. When you've lost control, suddenly, you're no longer choosing to act. You're being pulled by an inner compulsion. You become a slave to yourself, a victim of your own lack of discipline. From there, things often spiral. The brain, saturated with dopamine, no longer finds satisfaction in basic stimulation. So it starts searching for more intense sources of pleasure. That's why men in this state often begin chasing unhealthy sexual outlets, relationships with prostitutes, risky encounters with multiple partners, or, as we explored in a previous video, excessive pornography consumption. These are all ways the brain desperately tries to recreate that original high. Here's something you must understand. The addiction isn't to masturbation itself. It's to the chemicals it releases. And because your brain is biologically designed to adapt, it starts needing more and more dopamine to feel the same pleasure it did the first time. That's when the real cycle begins. One where you're constantly hunting for the next way, the next moment to masturbate again. It becomes exaggerated. It becomes desperate. And at a certain point, your brain, in a protective response, starts blocking its own dopamine receptors, trying to prevent overload. But the result is even worse now. When you engage in the act, you feel nothing. There's no satisfaction, no joy, just numbness and frustration. You're left chasing a high that no longer exists, like a smoker who lights cigarette after cigarette, but never feels relaxed, or a sugar addict who eats chocolate until they're sick, even like an alcoholic pouring drink after drink, hoping the next one will bring peace. That's how dark it gets. And by now, you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with Stoicism? Isn't Stoicism about philosophy, strength, and endurance? What do men like Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, or Epictetus have to say about something as personal and physical as masturbation? More than you might think. The great Stoics, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Panaetios of Rhodes, were masters of self-control. They didn't just write about ideals. They lived through chaos, temptation, and inner conflict and still held fast to wisdom and discipline. Their views on pleasure, lust, and restraint go far deeper than surface morality. To them, the pursuit of fleeting physical pleasure wasn't just a distraction. It was a test of awareness, control, and personal strength. From Epictetus's calm teachings to Seneca's raw reflections, the Stoics explored the nature of desire with rare honesty. They believed that pleasure, including sexual pleasure, could be dangerous not because it was evil, but because it often enslaved the mind if left unchecked. To the Stoics, masturbation wasn't simply about satisfying carnal urges. It was a mirror that revealed whether you were truly the master of your mind or a prisoner of your body. In the Stoic philosophy, true freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you feel like. It comes from something far more powerful: mastery over your desires. For the Stoics, conquering worldly passions and fleeting pleasures was not a denial of life. It was an elevation of the human spirit. Epictetus once said that it is not the pursuit of pleasure that defines a good man, but the strength to resist it. He believed that real character is forged not in indulgence, but in discipline. In this context, it's not about rejecting pleasure entirely. It's about learning to enjoy it consciously, without being dominated by it. Think about that for a moment. Anyone can chase pleasure, but how many can enjoy it without being controlled by it? How many can feel desire rise and still remain still, calm, aware? That's the line that separates those trapped by their impulses from those who have reached a higher level of self-awareness. As Seneca reminds us, the goal isn't to repress emotion or desire. It's to understand it, to look inward, not with shame, but with clarity. The Stoic view of masturbation isn't a harsh condemnation or some outdated moral judgment. It's a reflection, a chance to examine ourselves more deeply. They believe that when we face our desires head-on, without distraction, we can transform them from destructive impulses into tools for personal growth. And that transformation starts by mastering our emotions, not avoiding them. Instead of being slaves to our urges, we must become their masters. And that mastery begins with recognizing that every action, even the most private, has consequences, not just for us, but for the natural order of the world around us. The Stoics deeply valued harmony with nature. They believed that when we give into uncontrolled desire, like compulsive masturbation, we drift away from that harmony. We disconnect from our true selves and from the peaceful balance that nature intended for us. What follows is often an internal storm: guilt, shame, emptiness, regret. When pleasure is pursued without awareness, it often leaves behind a trail of emotional wreckage. And if you've ever found yourself stuck in that cycle, you're not alone. The Stoics teach us a better way. They urge us to face these overwhelming emotions not with fear, but with introspection, to sit with them, understand them, and respond. Instead of react, through conscious reflection, we can begin to regulate our emotions, transforming chaos into calm, confusion into clarity, and in doing so, we find something extraordinary: inner peace. Not the fake kind that comes from distraction or momentary highs, but the real kind, the kind that comes from discipline, from knowing that you are in control of your own mind. Let me share a true, personal story with you. I once knew someone, a man who, for years, battled compulsive masturbation. To him, it was a secret escape, a way to feel comfort, to silence the noise of life. But every time it ended, he found himself drowning in guilt, emotional emptiness, and self-hatred. It was a vicious cycle, pleasure followed by pain. Then, one day, he discovered Stoic philosophy. Slowly, he began to shift his thinking. Instead of running from desire, he began to face it. He started practicing self-regulation, mindfulness, and discipline. He meditated. He reflected. He journaled his thoughts. It wasn't easy, but over time, he changed. He learned to recognize when his desire was rising, and rather than give in, he paused. He questioned it. He breathed through it, and in doing so, he reclaimed a power he didn't even realize he had lost. Today, he lives with a quiet strength, no longer a slave to momentary pleasure, but a man grounded in authentic self-control. His joy doesn't come from indulgence anymore. It comes from living with intention, from choosing what is right over what is easy. And that's what the Stoics believed all along. True satisfaction, the kind that lasts, is found not in feeding your every desire, but in living according to your deepest values. The more we give in to fleeting cravings, the further we drift from the life we're truly meant to live. Compulsive masturbation, when left unchecked, pulls us away from our noblest path. It robs us of clarity, weakens our purpose, and distracts us from the real happiness found in virtue and discipline. But we're not powerless. By embracing practices like meditation, journaling, and daily reflection, we train our minds to find peace without needing escape. We start to recognize temptation not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Because every time you resist that urge, you're not losing something, you're building something. You're building mental strength, emotional resilience, and spiritual freedom. You're creating space for joy that doesn't fade, and for confidence that doesn't depend on instant gratification. This is the kind of self-mastery the Stoics spoke of. A life not ruled by impulse, but guided by purpose. The path isn't easy, but it's worth it.